Canada's premiers and territorial leaders are getting down to business today at their annual summer summit. Over the next 2 days, they hope to tackle a number of pressing issues, including a price on carbon. One of the premiers is leading the charge against the federal carbon price, and that premier is Ontario Premier Doug Ford. Here's what he had to say just moments ago.
I'm here to carry the banner for Ontario and to discuss the issues that matter to our great province. I want to thank Premier Moe for joining me here this morning. We have a lot in common and share many of the same priorities. The Premier and I had a great meeting last night. Actually, right by that campfire, had a great meeting last night to discuss the issues shared between our provinces. And at the top of the agenda was the issue of the carbon tax, where we both are on the exact same page. I was elected on a promise to scrap the carbon tax. It's a bad tax for families, and it's a bad tax for businesses. I'm here to gather support among my provincial counterparts against the federal carbon tax. And last night, when I met Premier Moe and agreed to stand shoulder to shoulder with him on this issue, I'm pleased to announce that Ontario will join forces with Saskatchewan and use every tool at our disposal to challenge the federal carbon tax. Ontario will support Saskatchewan in intervening in the reference case they have launched with the Court of Appeal. This is an important step in the fight against the federal carbon tax. Our provinces are strongest when we stand together, and this will show unity and will send a clear message to the federal government.
Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe is also there alongside Doug Ford. Here's what he had to say.
Well, thank you, Doug, and thank you, everyone, and welcome to beautiful New Brunswick, and welcome to the Council of Federation meeting here in St. Andrews. And I want to begin by thanking the people of Ontario, and I want to begin by thanking Premier Doug Ford. Today, it is clear more than ever that Canadians understand that a carbon tax is an ineffective policy that simply does not reduce emissions. A carbon tax reduces jobs. A carbon tax reduces opportunities by moving them from our Canadian communities to other areas of the world where they have no such policy. Canada is a huge country. Canada is very economically diverse. Each region in our great nation has its own strength. A made-in-Ottawa carbon tax plan that fails to recognize the parameters that were agreed to by all First Ministers, including our Prime Minister, in the Vancouver Declaration, is not recognized by a carbon tax. A one-size-fits-all carbon tax fails to recognize the diverse nature of our great Canadian economy. This made-in-Ottawa carbon tax plan finds our nation now in this position. We have 2 provinces in compliance, we have 2 provinces in court, and we have the rest of the country not meeting the federal carbon tax backstop. Like Ontario, Saskatchewan acknowledges the challenges of global climate change. Saskatchewan has put forward a comprehensive, innovative climate change plan called the Prairie Resilience. We will accomplish our goal of addressing climate change without a carbon tax. We have filed a reference question to the Saskatchewan Court of Appeal, and today we are grateful that the people of Ontario under Premier Ford's leadership will join us every step of the way. Thank you to the people of Ontario, thank you to Premier Ford, and thank you to all.
Thank you.
Thanks, sir.
Appreciate it.
Take care.
Thank you.
Yes. Yes.
CBC's Nick Gamache is also in St. Andrews at the Premier's meeting. Nick, so how will those statements on the carbon tax play out at this meeting today? Because the New Brunswick Premier, the province you're in and who's chair of the meeting, wanted to focus on trade.
You're absolutely right, but there's going to be a lot of talk about carbon pricing. Scott Moe was the most vocal opponent of it on the national stage. Now he's got a big ally with Doug Ford saying they'll join the court challenge to Ottawa's powers to impose a national price on carbon. And the key line that I took from their brief statement, and notice they didn't take any questions, was that they want to gather support from other provinces. We've already heard from PEI that they have problems with the idea of imposing a price on carbon. Are there others that could join? Because all of a sudden you've got a very different picture nationally if a number of provinces choose not to go ahead with their own plan and Ottawa is forced to step in. That's a very different dynamic, and that was partly addressed yesterday in the federal cabinet shuffle. You're going to have Dominic LeBlanc in charge of federal-provincial relations, and one of his jobs will be to be the enforcer, go to those provinces that are saying we're not going to have a plan, we're challenging Ottawa's powers to impose a national price on carbon. It will be his job to push back against that. So there's going to be a lot of talk around that today, but also talk on trade. Even if all the premiers want to talk trade, interprovincial trade, they don't know exactly how to go about removing all the barriers that remain despite the fact that there is a Canadian free trade deal. How to move from words to actions. And a bit earlier you spoke to Brian Pallister, the Premier of Manitoba, and he talked about the need to move beyond what the premiers have agreed to in the past.
We've had 23 tables going on in the last year since the progress we made last year, looking to find solutions. Now we have to land the plane. Now we have to get these barriers out of the way. And that's going to require the premiers to put their foot down and say, look, this is enough. Enough is enough. Talk is not enough to put money on the kitchen tables of Canadian families. Let's get these barriers out of the way and demonstrate the courage of our own convictions.
So you can expect a few announcements on that front. And right now the premiers are talking trade, but north-south trade with the U.S. The ambassador to Washington, David McNaughton, giving them a briefing, telling them what exactly is going on in the United States. We just spoke to him for CBC Radio's The House, and you responded to what President Trump talked about yesterday, his desire to reach a bilateral deal with Mexico, maybe one later with Canada. The ambassador saying there is no indication from the Mexicans that they want anything other than a trilateral deal.
Nick, thank you for all of this. Appreciate your time.